Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling the fascinating and, well, sometimes head-scratching world of quantum computing. We're zeroing in on a key player, Rigetti computing.
Yeah, Rigetti. We've pulled together a bunch of recent analyses trying to really, get under the hood. We're looking at their business model, how they make money, or maybe where the challenges are there. Plus, where they sit in this really competitive field and what the future might look like for them and, well, quantum computing generally.
Exactly. Our mission here is to kind of demystify Rigetti a bit, pull out the key stuff from all this info, bring some clarity, hopefully, to what's a pretty complex and fast-moving area, maybe find some surprises along the way.
Let's hope so.
Okay, let's get into it. How does Rigetti actually, operate as a business in this quantum space?
Well, Rigetti has set up an interesting kind of diversified way to bring in revenue. It's not just one thing. The reports point to four main ways they generate income.
Okay, what's the first one?
First up is quantum hardware sales. So they don't just design these things, these processors. They actually build and sell their own quantum processors and the gear that goes with them, directly to customers who want it on site.
Right, so you could, in theory, have your own Rigetti quantum computer in your building.
Exactly, if you've got the budget and the need, yeah. Then number two is their quantum cloud services, or QCS. That seems like a pretty big part of their plan.
QCS, okay.
Yeah, it gives people remote access to Rigetti's quantum computers using their cloud platform. It's subscription-based, different levels for different users, researchers, big companies, that sort of thing.
Makes sense.
And they specifically mention access to things like your 9-qubit Novera QPU, that's quantum processing unit, and the bigger 84-qubit Anka-3 system through this cloud service.
So it's kind of like renting time on these super powerful quantum machines.
Yeah.
That definitely makes it more accessible. What's number 3 on the list?
That would be research partnerships and collaborations. They get funding by teaming up with universities, other companies, government agencies. They work together on R&D projects.
Ah, so it's funding, but it also pushes their own research forward.
Exactly. It's a smart way to, get paid to innovate, essentially.
And the fourth stream?
That's their quantum foundry services. They have this place, Fab 1 in California, which they call the world's first dedicated quantum foundry.
Fab 1, right.
And they use it to make quantum integrated circuits, they call them Cree-ICs, for other people in the research world. So other labs or groups can basically order custom quantum bits from them.
Huh, interesting. So they're using their manufacturing muscle, not just for themselves, but to help the whole quantum field along. That's clever. What about where the money comes from, geographically speaking?
Okay, yeah, the breakdown's interesting. North America is the biggest chunk, about 65%. Then Europe is next, around 22%. And Asia Pacific makes up the remaining 13%.
So definitely a strong North American focus right now.
Clearly their main market at this point, yeah.
Okay, so that gives us a good picture of the how and where of their revenue. Now, the really crucial bit, the financials. How did the numbers actually stack up?
Well, looking at the recent figures, it's a bit of a mixed bag, you could say. For Q1 2025, they reported revenue of $1.5 million. But, and this is a big but, it was a huge drop, like 52.5% down compared to the same quarter the previous year, and also down 36% from the quarter just before it.
Wow, that's a steep decline. What does that usually signal?
It often points to a challenge in keeping the contracts rolling in consistently. Maybe after some big projects ended. It's a common hurdle for tech companies trying to move from pure R&D to actually selling stuff reliably.
Right, smoothing out that revenue.
Exactly. But here's a twist. In that same Q1 2025, they reported a net income of $42.6 million.
Wait, how? With revenue dropping like that?
Good question. You have to dig a bit deeper. Most of that profit, like $61.2 million of it, was actually a non-cash gain. It came from changes in how the market valued their liabilities, their debt, basically.
Ah, so it's more of an accounting thing, not cash from selling quantum services.
Precisely. It shows why you can't just look at the headline profit number, especially with early-stage tech. You need to see if the core business is actually growing.
Makes sense. So what about the whole of last year, 2024? What did that look like?
Okay. For full year 2024, Rigetti brought in $10.8 million in revenue, but their operating expenses were way higher, $74.2 million. Yeah. Which led to a net loss for the year of $201.0 million. It really just highlights how expensive this field is. The R&D costs are massive just to stay in the race.
Absolutely. You have to spend big to play in the quantum sandbox.
Yeah.
But are they okay for cash? Do they have enough money to keep the lights on and keep developing?
Well, as of the end of 2024, their cash position looked pretty solid, actually. They had $217.2 million in cash, equivalents, and securities.
Okay, that's a decent buffer.
And it got better. By April 2025, it was up to $237.7 million. That was thanks to a big $35 million investment from a company called Quanta Computer. So yeah, they do have a good amount of runway right now.
That's good to hear. So big investments, cash reserves looking okay, but revenue still quite small compared to the spending. Is any particular area driving most of that current income?
Yes, and this is really striking. As of Q1 2025, almost 90%, 89.5% to be exact, of their revenue came from government contracts.
Wow, nearly all of it.
Yeah, particularly in things like cybersecurity and defense. So that's clearly a huge strategic focus for them. And you also have to remember those big partnerships like that $250 million deal with Quanta Computer spread over 5 years. Those are vital for the long game.
Right.
But we also saw that their 2024 revenue, that $10.79 million, was actually down about 10% from 2023. So that just reinforces the revenue challenge we talked about.
And relying so heavily on government contracts, does that make them vulnerable if, say, government priorities shift?
That's a really good question. It's definitely a risk factor to consider. So yeah, a mixed picture, strong backing, key partners, but real hurdles in getting that consistent commercial revenue up.
Okay. Now, Rigetti's not alone, obviously. This quantum space is getting, well, pretty busy. Who are the main competitors they're up against?
Oh yeah, the competition is serious. You've got some huge, well-funded names. IBM Quantum is a big one. They've apparently racked up something like $1 billion in total quantum-related revenue already.
$1 billion. Wow.
Yeah. And they have some seriously advanced processors like their Condor chip with 11,121 qubits.
Whoa, over 1,000 qubits. Compared to Rigetti's 84, that really shows the scale difference with some players.
It really does. Then you've got Google Quantum AI, also a giant, famous for pushing those quantum supremacy experiments.
All right.
And then there's IonQ, they're a direct competitor, but they use a different technology, trapped ions. Rigetti uses superconducting circuits, remember?
Yes, different fundamental approaches.
Exactly. IonQ uses lasers on individual ion. Rigetti uses cooled electrical circuits. IonQ was actually the first to offer commercial quantum services, and their tech is known for being very precise. But, you know, every approach has pros and cons for scaling and keeping the quantum state stable.
So, trapped ions versus superconducting? Any other major tech approaches in the mix?
Definitely. There's D-Wave Systems. They were the first company to sell quantum computers commercially. They focus on something called quantum annealing, which is really good for specific types of problems like optimization.
Quantum annealing, okay. Different again.
And don't forget Xanadu Quantum Technologies. They're working with photonics using light particles for quantum computing. Their Borealis processor is an example of that. So yeah, it's a really diverse field, lots of different bets being placed on the winning technology.
Okay, so Rigetti is definitely swimming with some sharks, technologically and financially. What are their main strengths? What gives them an edge, potentially?
They do have some clear advantages. One big one is their vertical integration, meaning they control the whole process end to end, from designing the chips, making them in their own factory, right through to offering access via their cloud platform. That control can mean tighter optimization, maybe faster development cycles, better quality control, compared to companies relying on others for key parts.
Makes sense. If you build the whole car, you know how all the parts fit together.
Kind of like that, yeah. Though you could argue, does that stretch them too thin? Maybe lack the super specialization others have. It's a trade-off.
What else?
They were also first, apparently, with multi-chip quantum processor technology. Connecting multiple smaller chips together, that could be a really important way to scale up to more powerful systems down the line.
Interesting architectural approach.
And finally, having their own dedicated quantum foundry, that Fab 1 facility, that's pretty unique. It makes them less dependent on sharing busy manufacturing facilities with others and could improve reliability and customization for their specific chip needs.
Okay, so vertical integration, multi-chip architecture, their own factory. Those sound like solid plus points.
Yeah.
But what about the flip side? Where are their weaknesses when facing down IBM, Google, IonQ, and the others?
Well, one we already touched on is that revenue volatility. That big drop in Q1 2025, it really highlights how inconsistent the income can be. It suggests they might rely on just a few big contracts, which makes predicting steady growth really difficult.
Right, that feast or famine cycle can be tough. Any other major concerns?
There also seems to be a bit of a struggle, according to some reports, in turning their tech breakthroughs into broad commercial success. You know, the phrase low and shrinking revenue base came up relative to their tech progress.
Ouch.
Yeah, and their operating costs are still very high. That big gap between what they spend and what they earn means they're still burning through cash, relying heavily on investors to fund operations. Profitability seems quite a way off still.
And just purely on the tech specs, like qubit count.
Right. Purely on qubit numbers, they are behind some leaders. Their 84 qubit Anka 3 is impressive tech, no doubt. But like we said, compared to IBM's 1,121 qubit Condor, there's a gap in sheer scale right now. And finally, their cash flow from operations was negative recently, about $13,651 used in one period, and their overall cash pile has gone down a bit, despite that recent investment.
Got it. So some really cool tech and unique strategic points, but definite headwinds in terms of consistent revenue, commercial traction, and just keeping up with the scale of some rivals.
Okay, let's pivot now. What about the future? What's the overall market looking like, and how might Rigetti fit into that growing picture?
Well, the general outlook for the whole quantum computing market is very positive, really optimistic, actually. Projections show some serious growth ahead.
Like how much?
So the global market is expected to go from roughly $1.3 billion in 2024 up to about $5.3 billion by 2029. That's a compound annual growth rate, CAGR, of like 32.7%.
That's pretty rapid growth.
It is. And some forecasts are even more bullish, maybe $12.6 billion by 2032, a 34.8% CAGR. Another analysis suggests it could hit $16.22 billion by 2034, still growing fast at nearly 31% per year.
Wow, so the tide is definitely rising for the whole industry. Seems that way. The whole ecosystem is expanding fast, lots of investment flowing in, more understanding of potential uses.
So even with individual company challenges, the overall opportunity looks huge. What has Rigetti been doing lately that might help them grab a piece of that expanding pie?
They've had some interesting technical developments. For example, they were part of research published in Nature Physics on controlling a superconducting qubit with optical signals light, basically.
Right.
That was a collaboration with big names like Harvard, MIT, University of Chicago.
Okay, pushing the science forward.
Yeah. And their 84-qubit Anka 3 system is showing good results, apparently achieving 99.0% median fidelity on a key type of quantum gate called iSwap. That basically means their operations are getting more accurate, fewer errors.
Which is crucial for actually doing useful calculations.
Absolutely. And they're also testing real-world applications, like using a new quantum algorithm to optimize power grids, using real energy data. That points towards progress on finding that quantum advantage for practical problems.
So science progress and looking at actual applications. What about the business side? Strategy, investments.
Well, we mentioned that key $35 million investment from Quanta Computer back in April 2025. That wasn't just cash. It's part of a wider strategic tie-up with a major hardware maker, which could be really important.
Right, the partnership aspect.
Exactly. They also did a $100 million stock offering back in November 2024 to raise funds. And they're still actively chasing those government research partnerships in the US and the UK. That can bring in steadier funding and add credibility.
Okay, so they're definitely working on the tech and trying to secure the financial runway. How is their overall strategy viewed looking ahead?
Their focus on hybrid quantum classical computing seems smart. That's combining quantum processors with traditional ones, using each for what it does best.
Makes sense for the near term.
Many people think that's the most practical path forward for a while, and delivering it via the cloud, their QCS platform, makes it accessible. So those strategic choices seem pretty well aligned with where the market seems to be heading.
Sounds like a sensible approach, leveraging today's tech while building for tomorrow's quantum power. But you mentioned market volatility earlier. Is there still quite a bit of uncertainty around them?
Oh, for sure. Market sentiment is definitely still jumpy. You see that in their stock price. It dropped significantly, 48.1% in Q1 2025. That probably reflects wider doubts about how quickly any quantum company can become truly commercial. Maybe some specific investor nerves about Rigetti's revenue path, too.
Right. So huge potential, but still a lot of show me the money sentiment, perhaps.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground on Rigetti. Let's try and boil down the key takeaways for you, our listener.
Okay, summing up. Rigetti has this diversified approach: hardware, cloud, partnerships, foundry services. But they're definitely living the financial reality of this very expensive early-stage industry. You see that in the fluctuating revenue and the high R&D spend. And competitively, they've got some neat tech advantages like that vertical integration and their chip architecture. But man, they are up against some giants, and they face real challenges in getting consistent commercial sales and reaching profitability.
And looking forward, the overall quantum market forecast is huge, really exciting. Rigetti is making moves, tech innovations, key investments to try and capture some of that growth. But, the hurdles are still there. Turning potential into profit, proving sustainable performance in a market that's still finding its feet.
Exactly. It's this really interesting mix of bleeding-edge science and the tough realities of building a business in a field that's still being invented, almost. So for you, the listener, thinking about this massive projected market growth and all these different quantum technologies people are trying, what factors do you think will really decide who wins in this transformative field? And what role could a more specialized, vertically integrated company like Rigetti play in that future? Definitely something interesting to chew on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.